Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody in person after a long 2 years of COVID. I'm very happy to present today's panel. This is sponsored by Lily and Sarah, Sarah & Associates, our sponsor, and the panel is Love and Divorce in Business.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today. We're very excited to be back live with the Doral Bar Association. My name is Lillian Sir. I'm managing partner for Sir & Associates. We are a full-service law firm, and we specialize in small to mid-sized businesses. We are very honored to be the presenting sponsor today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily. Our two panelists today, Clifford Benjamin. He's the founder and president of Summit Business Valuation Associates, and Zach Evangelista, partner at Sarah & Associates. Gentlemen, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're pleased to be here. Just a quick overview of what we're going to discuss today. So, love and divorce in business. Cliff is going to start us off talking about the love, because he's the non-attorney on the panel, and run through some of the things you and your partner should be thinking about, again, primarily from a finance and business operations perspective. And then I will tell you about what happens when you can no longer stand in the face of your partner and how to handle that.
So with that, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. It's love and divorce and business partnerships. So when I work with clients and try to determine the best way to bring people together, first I like to talk about their strengths and weaknesses. The idea here, and it has to be an honest assessment, almost like dating. You go on a few dates and you start to really dig in to understand what the character of the individual is. It's really important in business to understand the character. And you only get that by listing your strengths and weaknesses, and actually doing it on your own and then bringing it to the group. I like to look at partnerships in business from a market point of view. In other words, when you come together as two, what's your view of the future? Like as if you were dating or getting married. What is the partner? How's the partnership going to work? How will the market react to the partnership? How will the market accept the partnership? You have to define those roles. And all about that partner, like dating and like marriage, you want to know you're getting involved with a financially strong individual. So this is a tough part. Ask for a credit app. Let's take a look at their credit history. If you need a business loan, you better know they're solid. You don't want to find out they've got a credit problem when you decided to get the loan to grow your business. You want to know what it is up front. The credit app is really important. So, you want to cohabitate. Just like moving into an apartment, condo, or house, you're going to work together side by side in an office. How are you going to work through your strengths and weaknesses? When you're working through your strengths and weaknesses, you'll write those out, sincerely. So that when you're working through a difficult position, you'll know what that individual's position is, what their strengths are, and you can refer to it. I know this is something you don't like to talk about, but we need to because X is the result we're trying to achieve. Functions and service in a business. When you're working on this partnership, you want to take a look at who's responsible for what. Some people call that an operating agreement. My friend Zachariah over here will talk much more about that. So you want to align your responsibility and you want to figure out tiebreakers. If it's two individuals with equal voting power, how are you going to break a tie? Is it yes, no, and you don't make a decision? That's not a way to run a business. So you've got to think about a tiebreaker when you're working on your partnership. How do you debate choices? Do you take it out of the office? Do you put time together? Do you put it in a calendar? Usually the businesses start, they're running hard. Maybe they're running in different ways. Maybe they're running together. But you've always got to find time to deal with the core issues. Agreeing to an operating meeting. Take great notes. I take them in my business. Got to take them in yours. What have you agreed to? Have your partner sign the agreement that says these are the things we've decided to talk about, and here are the results we want to achieve. In your operating meetings, have a corporate secretary as well. Decide who's going to take the notes, maybe alternate it back and forth, it helps to break out confusion or break up confusion at a later time. Maintaining files and central files, that's obvious. And then including in your operating agreement, working with a really good lawyer, you should do that up front, get that operating agreement together. But have provisions in there that address hiring, partnership tracks for new people, stipulate the termination provisions. Somebody gets sick, somebody says they don't want to do the business anymore, or they want out. Or the worst scenario is your key partner has the relationships and something happens to him or her. And now who are you going to call? The spouse? Hey, we need help with this. I've been called into situations with big business that has an independent sort of contractor track where the business has an emergency event, flood, hurricane, and one of the partners has a heart attack and dies. Now you got to figure out how to cover up for that. So it's really important that you have alternate people to help out in the business. Have an exit plan. As a business valuation analyst, I always want to do evaluations, how to figure out what the value of the business is at the end. Maybe there's a dispute, but have a dispute plan in place. So if you say we need 3 business valuations, it's expensive, but it's effective. Or have 1 business valuation. But you should have a way to determine the value at the end. So you're not litigating it at the end. Zach, you gotta have a good then, don't you? You gotta have a good team around you. Good lawyers, good CPAs,
Yes.
good consultants, right?
Bankers, insurance brokers, whole full goal pack.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, as Cliff mentioned, I think this might be a little bit biased, but I think it plays to this room. One of the stars of that bullpen will be your attorney. And so, as you're going through these assessments with your partners of all the points that Cliff has mentioned, you do want to think about, and we strongly advise you, get that all written down into an operating agreement, shareholders agreement, depending on whether you're a corporation or LLC. But you also want to think about what you don't necessarily want in that operating agreement. So, for instance, some of the points that Cliff mentioned, dispute resolution. Do you mediate? Do you arbitrate? Who pays for the valuations? Those are things you're going to want to make sure in the operating agreement. Whereas other things, though I think are critical to the operation of the business, such as meeting, frequently, perhaps monthly when you first start, are very important, but you might not want to put that level of detail into your operating agreement to be bound by that. You want to find that balance between a solid structure that you and your partner have agreed to, countered against the flexibility to pivot and grow. And it's an art, not a science, but it's definitely something that needs to be part of the consideration when you're structuring your operating agreement during your honeymoon phase. Some other things to think about when you are dating and you're starting to move in, cohabitating, as Cliff alluded to. Death, disability, someone dies. Those are pretty evident and at the surface of what do we want to do, what do we want to agree to. But what we've seen, particularly in this post-COVID world, arise a lot is what happens when you just don't get along anymore. There's not a real reason for it necessarily, or what we hear a lot is someone comes to us, my partner's not pulling their weight anymore. We'll talk about what to do in a second when you're actually at that phase, but when you're in your honeymoon stage, you can have that conversation then. It can be very beneficial. You can have rights to force the other party to buy, force them to sell, whatever it may be. But if you can think through your, as Cliff was saying, your exit strategy, including what happens when you guys no longer want to be together. If you can build that into your operating agreement, your prenup, that will make the litigation minimal, hopefully, or much less expensive than if you hadn't discussed that. Or, we have some clients who don't even have operating agreements.
Hey, Zach, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I know we're supposed to save these for last.
Go ahead.
All right. When do you want to go through your prenup? If you're, hold on a second, if you're getting married, the matrimonial lawyers will tell you, not the day before the wedding, maybe not the week before the wedding. They might tell you, yeah, get your prenup done a month before the wedding. So that way everybody's got full time to think about all the elements of that prenup. What's the best time to put together a prenup in a business?
The sooner the better, but before you start operating. Because as soon as you start operating, you have liabilities, you have exposure, you have customers, you have vendors, you have the potential for bad things to happen. But what I would also say is it's never too late. And even when you have your operating agreement, periodically you want to go back and revisit it. Because we'll meet with clients very early on in their business. They haven't started yet. They're just putting the business plan together. They know what they think the business is going to look like. And then 3 years later, especially in today's day and age, it's completely different. And so you want to have that, again, flexibility to go back, reassess, and modify the relationship between you and your business partner. And it makes sense to not just do it, put it in a drawer, and then 15 years later pull it out. You want to constantly be looking at it, maybe not constantly, but you want to periodically look at it and update it. So when you're getting along, it's probably a very broad answer to that, but let's pivot a bit and talk about what happens when you're starting a little bit annoyed at the way your partner is dealing with customers, or you're showing up at 8 o'clock, they're not showing up until whatever time, or you just kind of feel like there's no longer that same effort or enthusiasm, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you don't really feel as enthusiastic about the business, and you're getting that 7-year itch. I tried to find out what the business equivalent is, and couldn't find anything on Google. Thanks, but it definitely happens. You and your partner, one of you wants to get out. But we're talking right now in the scenario where you haven't discussed it, and it's not on the surface, it's not evident, but you're thinking about it. What should you be doing before you come to us or before you discuss with your partner? Two critical things would be, one, make sure you know what agreements you have with your partner. We're in a very contentious litigation right now where nobody realized that the company had bylaws until 6 months into the litigation. Hasn't fundamentally shifted the litigation, but it has changed things because nobody knew that these terms governed what was going on. So before you do anything, make sure you know whether or not you have an operating agreement or any type of equivalent. The other thing is talk to Cliff. Try to make sure you understand what the value of the company is. Because if you're going to say, I want to buy you out, or I want you to buy me out, you need to have an idea of what that looks like, and is it realistic? Because a lot of companies can be worth much more than the cash either partner has on hand. And if it is worth a lot more, you can at least have the time before you approach your partner to think through, well, how can we structure this? Can I talk to my banker? Maybe some seller financing. Try to come up with as much of the structure of the buyout you can before you approach your partner to maybe ease into that conversation of, hey, I like you, but I don't love you. Or it's the other way, whatever. The other way around, I love you, but I don't like you anymore. And from a very legal perspective there, when it comes to the value, some businesses, they produce statements quarterly or annually, and you have a good idea of what it is. We have sometimes people come to us and we ask them what the company's worth. They have no idea. And we ask them when the last time they saw financials was, and they say, well, I have my K1. And sometimes they don't even know what their K1 looks like. You, as an owner, always have an absolute right to see the corporate records, which includes the high-level finances of the company. Now, in terms of tipping off your partner or partners to, hey, I'm not so happy. If you've been in the business 10 years and this is the first time you're asking for the records, they might get a little suspicious. If you send the actual demand as it's required under the statutes for the inspection of the books, they're probably going to get a bit curious. But, in terms of massaging that with your partners and their response to it, that's, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. But you do have that right. And you want to get that information to be able to know how you're going to be able to talk to your partners about exiting the business. A couple other points. Make sure you continue to participate in the business. Just don't check out completely, because that's not going to help anybody. It's going to make your partners mad and perhaps also affect the value of the business. So, try to put on a happy face, grin and bear it until you have your ducks in a row and are ready to have that conversation with your partners about, hey, I think you're done, or I think I'm done. Let's part ways, and this is what I think I can offer you. Now, what happens if it's beyond that? Litigation has already started, or it's on the surface. You and your partner have been in a yelling match every day over the last month, and everybody knows it's time to call it quits. This is more about the don'ts than the do's. Do not start a competing business. That will be very bad for you, bad for your current business, and will only hurt your position in the long run. We have people ask, can I just take all the clients? It's my relationships. Can I just go on Sunday, start a new company and do that? Obviously you could, but you are going to get railroaded in litigation because you did that. Do not move funds. Those are always fun litigations when the partner comes to us and says, my partner moved all the funds to Uruguay, what do I do now? That's going to be extremely expensive for everybody, but don't be the person who does that. Try to shield the employees. If it's a small shop and you have a handful of employees, they're probably going to know what's going on. But if you have a couple dozen employees or larger, don't try to bring them into it. Think of it in a divorce like children. Sometimes people use their children as, they weaponize them, which is never good. It's not to the same extent, but you don't want to do that with your employees. Don't try to get them to start picking sides, setting them up for whatever it may be. And also, especially in today's employment market, you don't want to freak them out because they're going to leave. They're not going to want to stick around for an ugly fight. So as much as you can, keep them out of it. Don't worry about depositions and the record and all of that stuff, because your lawyer will handle all of that, counseling employees and whatever it may be, when that eventually comes up, if this actually is going to go all the way through litigation. And then I guess the last point, as lawyers always like to say, is write it down. Write it down.
By the way, write everything down.
Right.
Have 2 sets of calendars. I do. One calendar is with my clients. The other calendar is internal work. And so that way I know what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and for what purpose. In litigation, it will help at a ton when you're able to show books and records. Time spent, subject matter, you want to protect your clients against litigation, then run your calendar for the outside business as a separate calendar. Like I said, that's what I do. I keep a notebook. Every meeting, every conference, all notes. My family thinks I'm a little over the top on taking notes, but you never know what one word, and you know this, how one word can translate into a victory, a fact pattern, or a conclusion.
Yes. You're talking they're being brought in as an owner, a partner to the practice.
Well, this is not, I have a real case like that, the person who wants to do that. So I want you to advise what should I tell. Of course, we're going to talk to Lily too, but then you guys. But what is the most important thing to do?
Well, first of all, hypothetically, in a scenario very similar to the real world one, because we're disclaimer not providing any actual legal advice right now, but if it is being brought in as an employee solely, you want to think about options to purchase, to be built into the employment agreement. Even better for an employee is just vesting of equity without the need to purchase. It wouldn't be unreasonable that the owner of the practice is going to want money in exchange for the ownership, but setting the values at this time, and maybe Cliff can speak a bit about that, would be.
Yeah, it would depend upon whether you're a W-2 employer or an ownership track, right? If you're being hired as a young doctor and you're on an ownership track, I might encourage you to take a look at a stock agreement or an operating agreement to see what needs to be met in order for that young doctor to become a partner. And the clearer the understanding there is up front on that operating agreement, the more direct the doctor will behave in order to make the achievement of the objectives written in the operating agreement. That will also enable the ownership to work with the doctor to get him on task if he's not. So the idea is when you're entering it, look at the operating agreement, see the provisions. I either need to behave this way, achieve this, or this is what the business has to do, which is separate of this new hire. Get a clarification on that and then work within that framework. The more, there's all this discussion about clear and understanding and transparency. They're very powerful words. You hear them a lot from politicians, and business is equally important. Some of the best advice you can give is have the doctor be fully understanding of what that business is.
I mediated a case like that with a problem like this 2 weeks ago, and the provisions for that very thing were totally unclear.
Yeah?
The parties didn't agree what it meant, what it said. Frankly, I didn't know what it meant. So it was causing huge problems in the litigation because the court had ruled that parole evidence was going to be admissible to interpret the agreement.
So I did.
Which meant that the Pandora's box was going to be opened and it was going to be a mess.
So I did a divorce of a really good doctor, a huge medical firm in Tennessee. And we were going by old provisions in an operating agreement that actually favored the doctor in the divorce. And we were doing sort of a collaborative approach. So the lawyers in the room, the experts in the room were supposed to be neutral. We were, at least I was. And in the middle of the meeting, I realized, this document is 5 years old. I want to see the new document. I got pushback. And eventually it showed up. It turned out that the doctor was now participating in a real estate program with the new operating agreement. So what it did is it came from an equity value of cash flow, and it moved into cash flow plus real estate holdings, and the partners were buying real estate. And the partnership, real estate, was worth a lot of money because at the time it was getting this huge appreciation. And so it's really important that you start with that young doctor with the operating agreement and then making sure it's current, because you never know what the new provisions will provide. Right?
What are your thoughts on including an impasse provision? I just drafted one, a 50-50 partner. I go, listen, if you're not going to go 49-51, it's going to be a problem at 50-50. There's a deadlock.
Mm-hmm.
This is one way I found to do that. Include an impasse provision, and you appoint in the operating agreement a mediator that you both select, a neutral mediator, to be the decider of any significant decision, material decision. And again, material decision is left up to the debate itself, but I thought that was helpful for the parties to know that, listen, if there's an impasse between us, two lawyers in this instance, they can go to an independent mediator that they both agreed on, and in that clause, we put that mediator in there, in that provision.
I think that's great to have. Other details you want to think about in those provisions would be costs. Are they just going to split the cost? Will the partnership itself bear the cost, which then would ultimately mean you're splitting them themselves? And what happens if they can't even agree on who the mediator is? Maybe perhaps having some objective measure for selecting the mediator as well, because if they're really in that level of disagreement, they may not even agree to that.
Well, that's why in this agreement it was specifically named. It's
going
to be
wow.
this mediator.
Okay.
They both selected this guy is going to be or woman is going to be the mediator, and so that's how we tried to. Of course, it's not a perfect solution.
Well, I think across the board with contracts, you need to understand there's no such thing as a perfect solution. There's no such thing as an ironclad. So
Something that helps.
you get a good litigator, they're going to find holes. Bad litigators going to make up holes.
And then a second follow-up to that is when people can't agree, they don't have an impasse clause. Some of these are attorneys, again, this is the example I'm using. One would go into Sunbiz and change just unilaterally the partner, remove them from Sunbiz,
and then the other one goes back and puts himself back. It's a mess. And obviously, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's another of the don'ts. Just like you don't move funds, you don't involve the employees, don't go and change the corporate records without the other partner knowing. That's horrible. And a breach of fiduciary duties, and just taking those what you think are minor actions could greatly prejudice you in a litigation if you were to get to that point, and also create counterclaims against you, which, the two wrongs don't make a right, two wrongs make litigators happy, because now there's more things to argue about. So yeah, I would say to avoid that. And in terms of dispute resolution, I know Cliff mentioned it earlier, and that's what you were getting at now, Santiago, is, we like to have sometimes tiered dispute resolution approaches. Even before mediation, the parties agree they'll sit down. You're partners. You chose to work together for a reason. Before you start spending costs on mediators and attorneys, we will put in writing what the dispute is. We will meet in good faith for, within 30 days, whatever it may be. If that doesn't work, then we go to a mediator. And then if that doesn't work, then you have to, pick your poison of arbitration or litigation. But the more you lay out in the agreement itself of how you're going to resolve disputes, the less there is for the litigators to argue. So that means the less expensive it will be. And then arbitration versus litigation is a very personal decision, I guess.
On that, go ahead.
I think Lily had a
I
question.
had a question, but it's really more technical. Can you dive in a little bit deeper as to the clauses that would be required in the event of death? Or in the case where Dora brought up, you have a young doctor on a partnership track, the other doctor dies, and the ability of purchasing that practice.
Yeah, so from my perspective, when preparing operating agreements, that's usually where a bulk of the work goes. In mine, it's usually Article 6, but different lawyers have different structures to their agreements. And so it's transfer of interest. And, to not get too technical, but to understand on the surface, ownership in a business is personal property. So same way you own your car, you own a pen, you own your shares in a corporation, your membership interest in an LLC. Now, for the most part, LLCs and corporations can work similarly, but at the core, one of the key differences is absent an agreement, the shares in a corporation are freely transferable. So if you don't have an agreement, there's nothing you can do to stop your fellow shareholders from selling the shares to someone else. An LLC is the complete opposite. Absent an agreement, you cannot sell your membership interest, your ownership in the LLC to somebody else. So depending on what you want, you need to make sure that's in the agreement. And typically the things you'll see or the questions we ask, first right of refusal. And it's usually a low-hanging fruit that most partners will agree that if someone is going to sell, if we're going to agree that you can sell your ownership, you have to sell to us first. And then there's involuntary transfers, and we go through which of these circumstances do you want to be able to force your partner to sell? Death is one that comes up, and that's because you don't want to be dealing with their wife or their children or whoever their heirs are. Disability, especially if it's owners who are active in the company, for God forbid, whatever reason, they're no longer can be active. Do you want them to still have the benefits of ownership? Bankruptcy, involuntary transfers, criminal convictions, doctors and other similar licensed professions. If you lose your license, do you still get to own? If your agreement doesn't say otherwise, they will. They'll maintain ownership. So these are the type of things that you want to think through. And then once you've identified what the triggering events are for transfers, then you need to think through valuation. Like Cliff was speaking about earlier, how are you going to determine the value? If it's a third-party purchaser, that's going to determine it. But if it's death, what's the value of the company? Is it going to be, treated as an ongoing concern? And Cliff can get into different types of valuations, but how are you going to make that decision of what the purchase is? And then how are you going to pay for it? We usually build in some type of seller financing because, again, if the company's worth a lot, but the partners haven't taken money out or, whatever the case may be,
great, company's worth $5 million, you might have $2.5 million to make that purchase. So build in some type of financing payment structure into the agreement as well.
Here's the other side. Build a bullpen. Build a bullpen. If you have more than a couple of people owning the company, build a team around it. Talk about football. We've got this great cast, wide receivers, running backs, linemen. Same thing is true business. You want to develop people around you so that there is an emergency event you can't plan for. You lose your partner to that. Something happens to the partnership itself. You got somebody who can step in. If you own a contracting company, you're building houses. You got to have people that can help lead any type of mechanical, where there's a lot of teams, develop that bullpen. It, in the long run, will make you a stronger company. Management-wise, it will add a lot of value to your business. It's called enterprise value. So if you build that team away from the partnership over the long run, the company will be worth more money for everybody.
I concur.
Okay. That about wraps it up. That's all the time we have for today.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today, and I look forward to you having to coming to the next Doral Bar Association event. Thank you.